Good afternoon, directors and management of the Hong Leong and CDL Group of companies, distinguished guests, speakers, and colleagues. Thank you for joining us virtually at the 9th Annual Sustainability Forum, organized by the Group Corporate Secretariat Services and CDL Sustainability Team. We're pleased to have expert speakers, Mr. Michael Tang, Head, Listing Policy and Product Admission at SGX Regco, Dr. Lawrence Lowe, Director at NUS Center for Governance and Sustainability, Mr. Shai Ganu, Managing Director and Global Leader, Executive Compensation and Board Advisory, WTW, Ms. Pruksa Iamtongtong, Senior Investment Director, Aberdeen Standard Investments, and our moderator, Ms. Esther An, CDL Chief Sustainability Officer, and Mr. Sherman Kwek, CDL Group CEO, who will be giving his closing remarks at the end of the forum. Before we start, can we please invite everyone to turn on their cameras for a group shot, please? We'll take a photo on the count of 3. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone. And before we proceed, can I invite all speakers to turn on your cameras for a group shot with our group CEO, please, and Esther as well. We'll take a photo on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sherman and speakers. Now, let's begin with an opening presentation by Ms. Esther An to set the scene for the forum.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. Since the last forum, which was actually held in October 2021, the world has changed a lot. And I would just focus on the sustainability landscape, which is already, quite exciting and dynamic. And today's theme is about zero in on future value. And why we talk about net zero is because after our last forum, November, that was actually the COP26 at Glasgow, that I'm sure everybody has heard about it and familiar with it. And in November, I have the honors to be there as well. And I have witnessed that everywhere we go, every panel, the main topic is about race to zero. And I would say that race to zero is really connecting countries and industries and also economies in different parts of the world to look at, we share one common North Star goal, that is to, decarbonize towards a net zero economy. And today, this campaign has garnered support from different countries, cities, and economy investor together, representing about more than 90% of global GDP, which is actually a very powerful force for change. And of course, net zero cut across the whole value chain in the financial sector. As before Glasgow, we already have the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance formed in early 2019. And this comprises all the leading institutional investors. And in July 2021, before Glasgow, Net Zero Insurance Alliance was formed that actually comprises many, global and also national levels insurance companies. And during Glasgow, Net Zero Banking Alliance was formed and comprising more than 90 over international banks, and that represents $66 trillion with asset accounting for about 43% of global banking assets. It's a huge group of influence. And of course, GFLANS, which is actually Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, was also formed during Glasgow, representing 450 firms representing stock exchanges, leading financial banks, insurance agencies, research firms, and also analysts and all. And it has also set up an office in Singapore already. And all these actually push to the one thing is the global convergence of the will and commitments towards a net zero economy is getting stronger and stronger. And of course, building sector was in the limelight also in the last COP and in the coming one as well. And the World Green Building Council has also pushed for net zero carbon building commitment for quite some years. And the CDL has actually pledged for net zero in February, and also raised the bar during Glasgow, joined 44 pioneering companies to adopt the whole life carbon emissions. That is also why we have to look at, scope 1 and 2 plus scope 3, which is actually our, investment, including our, investment and our, stakeholders and contractors and materials, carbon footprint as well. So after November, there's a lot of things actually it happened, but I would just highlight a few. In summer, it was really like a burning planet. Even in Portugal and France, and UK, all these traditional, they may not be so hot. Yeah, Portugal has a record high of 47 degrees Celsius. Spain, 43 degrees. It was really, really quite exceptional. And China experienced drought and then, and the longest heat wave. And then after that, there was actually floods. So I'm not going into great details on this. And July 28th, I want to bring to the attention of, share this. It's called the Earth Overshoot Day. This day actually varied from year to year. And this is actually based on the Global Footprint Network and the WWF assessment. And that is the day that the whole world uses up what we should have, the resources of the whole year. And now the world is living on credit, living on OD. So, what we need to do is to really look at how we conserve better. And just 2 weeks ago that we, and New York City has the Climate Week, which was actually the largest, climate event globally, featured 500 events in New York City, covering, 10 themes, including the built environment, energy, environmental justice, transport, finance, and sustainable living. And one topic is carry through the whole week is about nature, how humanity has actually caused much damage to nature, and how nature-based solution can actually help offer, solutions towards a net zero future. And my takeaway is actually the climate will not change for the better until, everyone change, especially the leading player, businesses, and not just regulators. And there are 3 things that ABCs that I want to just summarize. Alignment is important. Everybody has their own agenda and priority, whether different country, economy, sectors, and even within an organization. Everyone has their own KPIs. So how do we align and how do we look at the big picture? And, and then, of course, we need to strike a balance. No one solution will satisfy everybody. So how do we strike that right balance? And of course, as private sector, business case is very important. We have to look at how we can embrace and save the planet, not at the expense of financial viability. And the other way around, that we need to also look at how we can maintain profitable, not at the expense of the planet and people. And last but not least, the C is actually commitment and collective action. No one can save the world alone. So we need everyone to be on board, whether it is internal stakeholder, external stakeholder, along our value chain, supply chain. And we need to be creative also, apart from, urgent action. When we talk about net zero, a lot of people will think of like, energy efficiency, renewable energy, especially now during energy crisis and all. But actually, studies show that circularity solutions can help to contribute about 45% of solutions towards net zero future. So this is something that the whole world is actually looking at it now, especially the building sector, that, we are also keeping tab on this, and we will share more when we have more information and tips on how we can tap onto circular economy to help reduce carbon footprint. And of course, just to recap that, Singapore's Green Plan was launched, a year ago. And this year, this February, we're very excited that it has actually, Singapore finally pledged to net zero by or around 2050. And among the 5 pillars for building sector, we are all looking closely at number 3, which is energy reset. And we all know that in November, BCA actually rolled out a more stringent BCA Green Mark scheme. Now we are not looking at 4 levels, we are looking at only 2 levels, which is the Gold Plus and Platinum. And more importantly, is super low energy building for new buildings as well as existing. And by 2030, we should green 80% of all buildings in Singapore. As of now, it's about 50%. So there are a lot of opportunities, for solutions and also for green financing. And of course, coming with the net zero commitment, we also, heard the carbon tax is going to be going up quite substantially. 2 years later, it will be 5 times more. Currently, we are paying $5, and 24 onwards will be for 2 years, $25, and 2 years after that, it will be $45, 9 times more than today. And towards 2030, it's going to be all the way up to even $80. So for CDL, we have actually pledged for net zero, and we also understand that it's a very challenging task. So we adopt a very prudent approach, adopt a very cautious and phased approach. By 2030, we have committed to achieve net zero for all new developments and also 13 Singapore assets that are under our direct control and management. And from there, we are really learning by doing it, and we can expand to 2050, covering all buildings and all. And we need to be specific because investors and analysts are all looking at the issue of greenwashing. If you just pledge without roadmap, without specific targets and scope, you will be, risking being, considered as a greenwashing. And then we are not looking at the past or today. We're also looking at future investment and all. And with the support of our management, our exco, and also our board sustainability committee, we came up with this sustainable investment principles. Basically, making reference to the global best practices, whether it is UN SDG or UNPRI responsible investment in real estate guide, as well as TCFD, and we came up with a framework that have been clear with our HODs in our BDI, business development and investment, project department, and also asset management. And it was cleared by Board Sustainability Committee in January 2022. And in the good spirit of being transparent, we have disclosed it and posted online in February with very clear framework on the E, S, and G that you can refer to it. And the last slide is actually, we are all talking about a maze. We are really trying to navigate and survive in this sustainability maze that has actually exploded into the mainstream. It's challenging and ever changing, but how can we find solutions to do it? And today I'm really excited to have a panel of 4 speakers who are from regulator, academic, and business consultancy, and also investors. How they can help us to survive and navigate. Globally, there are altogether 600 ESG ratings, ranking, and standards. How can we, select the most relevant one for our own company, for your own reporting standard? And we also hear that, investors are taking ESG seriously as positive and negative screening. And Aberdeen, afterwards, we will hear from Futsal about what are the ESG factors that are financially materials and may have an impact on even corporate performance. And Shai is going to talk about from the business perspective, how can we add value? And of course, we have Dr. Lawrence Loh also will share with us what is considered as good sustainability report. So safe to say that we need to set ambitious target, but we also need to commit with action, and we also need to work together as to collaborate together. So now let me with great honors, I am going to pass the stage to Michael, who's actually will share more about SGX requirement and how we have actually stepped up on even climate disclosures and all. While there are challenges, there are also solutions that Michael is going to share. Over to you, please, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me back here again. Let me just check that you can see my slides right now. Great. So last year I had the opportunity to brief everyone on the impending changes to the listing rules. I'm glad to provide you with an update to the listing rules that were amended since last October. In fact, this was done in December last year. And another piece of update that I'd like to share with you that has taken place in the year that we've met is the establishment of the International Sustainability Standards Board. So let me just jump right in to the amendments to the listing rules. You would be familiar with this diagram. It depicts the primary components that we require companies to include within their sustainability reports. These are the material ESG factors, your policies, practices, and performance in relation to each of them, your targets for your ESG factors, the reporting framework that you've chosen to report against, as well as a statement from the board, given the importance of board governance around this issue. If you manage to take a look at the quote that was flashed just before I started speaking, it was actually taken from an article I wrote about the importance of governance and how governance is the golden thread running through sustainability. And because it is such an important element, we've also enhanced the requirements around governance for sustainability reporting. In addition to having a board statement from the board of directors that they've overseen the preparation of the overseen the oversight or provided the oversight on the preparation of the sustainability report. We also asked that the companies now start disclosing what are the management's responsibilities around sustainability reporting. And the I think critical factor that we've added this year as a sixth component is on climate reporting based on the TCFD recommendations. Esther has given a lot of developments on why climate is important, but maybe I can share a bit about why we decided that we needed to provide this update. In our review of the sustainability reports in 2021 that we've conducted together with Prof. Lawrence Loh, we found that half of our companies identified climate change as a material factor for their business. And this is in recognition of the importance of the topic. But only 1/3 of them are disclosing any GHG emissions or related factors in relation to climate change. And out of all these companies, only 2% of companies are using TCFD to guide their reporting. And TCFD has been recognized as the global consensus on what needs to be produced or contained within a sustainability report that's focused on climate. And that is why we've made this enhancement to provide guidance to our companies on what is truly important when you talk about climate. For the rollout of this proposal, we have adopted a phased roadmap approach. So starting this year, we need all companies to report against the TCFD recommendations on a comply or explain basis. But gradually, across the years, more carbon-intensive industries will be required to report against all of the TCFD framework on a mandatory basis. Importantly, you see that materials and buildings as a sector is also critically important, and that is why we expect that this sector reports on a mandatory basis for financial years commencing 1st January 2024. Now, another area that we've enhanced our requirements on is on board diversity. And to give a bit of flavor, this is really focused on the governance aspects of boards, ensuring that boards have sufficient diversity that would bring about the different perspectives that would enrich discussions at the board so that the board can guide the company through all the uncertainties that's taking place right now in the world. Specifically, we need boards and companies to have a board diversity policy in place to set their diversity targets, set out their plans to achieve these targets, and also describe what their progress towards achieving these targets are. And on an annual basis, to explain to your investors how the combination of the skills and talents on your board of directors contribute to the company and serves the needs of the companies going forward. You would have also heard, I think, in last month, that SGX and the Corporate Governance Advisory Council in Singapore announced proposals to start looking at mandating a 9-year tenure limit for independent directors. And part of the reason is also because we need to catalyze opportunities for board renewal so that we can also meet these diversity targets. This is something that I'm working very hard on. So I hope you'll be able to see the consultation in public sometime soon. Now, the next update I said I'll brief you on is on the setup of this International Sustainability Standards Board. This is a new initiative set up under the IFRS Foundations IFRS Foundation. So for the accountants and auditors here, you would be familiar with the setup of this organization. But I think, interestingly, what we see is that there's been a convergence of reporting standards, reporting frameworks, and systems in the market in the past couple of years. On this slide, you see some of the most popular icons of sustainability reporting, such as SASB, integrated reporting, GRI. I think the upshot that I would like you to take away from this picture is that there's consolidation taking place, and sometime in the future, I think we're likely to see GRI as one of the most popular standards for sustainability reporting still continue with their good work. And alongside of GRI is the setup of the ISSB and the new sustainability reporting standards that they will be promulgating. And I think these two standards would be the reporting standards that we will see going forward into the future that will guide companies in terms of comprehensive sustainability reporting. Esther mentioned a bit about this, but in June this year, we set up a Sustainability Reporting Advisory Committee together with the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority, essentially the corporate regulators in Singapore. And the idea and goal is really twofold. Firstly, we want to look at a roadmap for sustainability reporting in Singapore beyond just listed companies, but also other non-listed Singapore incorporated companies. The second objective of this advisory committee is to look at the international sustainability reporting standards out there, and propose and provide guide inputs into what's most appropriate for adoption in Singapore. This committee comprises CSOs, FIs, SME, investors, and I will just maybe add that Esther is chairing this committee. So I think we're in good hands in charting the way forward for Singapore. Maybe a bit more background into these ISSB standards. In March this year, the ISSB published. Hi. In March this year, the ISSB published 2 exposure drafts on what these sustainability standards might look like. I thought I'll give you a bit of background in terms of flavor of things to come. There is first an S1 draft, which sets out general requirements for sustainability reporting in general, and there is an S2, standards to S2 draft that is specifically for climate reporting. Maybe before I maybe jump into, I guess, the details of those standards and frameworks, I'll just say that these ISSB standards really is to be seen as the building blocks and a linkage between financial reporting as well as a more stakeholder inclusive types of reporting that GRI stands for. It is meant to operate alongside with these other reporting standards, and is to be set as a global baseline standards for reporting. What this means is that a reporter can choose to adopt the ISSB, and in addition, also adopt the GRI framework to report to satisfy the needs of its stakeholders. So going into S1, it sets out a general framework for what sustainability reports should look like, setting out 4 broad categories of information on governance, strategy, risk management, and matrix and targets. Those who are familiar with TCFD would know that this is very aligned and in fact consistent with how TCFD has asked for climate disclosures. But for S1, ISSB is asking us to use the same framework for all other ESG topics. You will also see that this is broadly aligned to the SGX primary components that I started the presentation on, that asks you for your governance structures and what are your matrix and targets in place for each of these material ESG factors. In addition to setting out this broad framework for reporting, it has some general reporting principles that ask companies to adopt as well, such as definitions of materiality, how frequently we report, and where your information should be located. Again, the accountants within the group here would be familiar that would know that this is really quite consistent with how the accounting standards are set up. There is a set of general reporting principles that guides reporting against these standards. Now, S2 which is specifically on climate, is taken from TCFD. So those who have done TCFD reporting would be well placed to report against the ISSB's S2 standards. But there are some areas that it goes beyond TCFD, and that's because it is a more prescriptive set of standards instead of a framework like what the TCFD is. So some examples, I'd ask companies to disclose the emission reduction targets and how you're using carbon offsets, the types of offsets you're using. It asks companies to disclose industry-specific matrix that's relevant for your industry. And it also requires Scope 3 emissions to be disclosed as a mandatory requirement. This is somewhat different from TCFD, which asks for these disclosures only if they are appropriate. Now, in the last minute, I thought I'll talk a bit about how technology can help companies in making better reports and help investors in using this information. Early last month, we launched ES Genome, which is a disclosure reporting platform that is available free for all investors. It is really divided into, I think, 3 parts. First, from the input perspective, it allows companies to input their ESG matrix through manual inputs or bulk upload or API upload. Allows companies to key in your commentaries in relation to each of these matrix, as well as discuss how they are relevant for your business. Now, the core component, which is the engine of this ESG Genome platform, is really to help you to map these indicators to all the different reporting frameworks out there like SASB, TCFD, GRI. And by bringing this mapping, it also allows companies to better see what are the reporting topics that are available that they should be reporting against. The final piece of this puzzle is really the use of this information. Firstly, because it is through a digital format, it will be in a structured manner and would allow even reporting companies to compare their own data against other peers who have reported through the same platform. Importantly for investors, the other point is that for companies, there's also functionality for companies to generate a sustainability report through the data that you've input into this disclosure platform. Ultimately, of course, the use of this information is for investors and stakeholders, and I think we are working very hard to make sure that this is something in terms of presentation that will meet the needs of investors. Separate from this, we've also rolled out a list of common reporting metrics that we ask companies to report against. But I think the following speakers would have more to talk about this in terms of the reporting matrix. I'll maybe stop my presentation here and take any questions at the panel later. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Michael. And well, definitely we are still in the hot soup of acronym with all the so-called harmonization and consolidation can see some result. And really glad to see the 2 pillars are moving together. You know, the investors, you know, the SASB side, the value reporting foundation, and also the the GRI, which is looking at the wider perspective of the planet and people. So we're still yet to see. Yeah, we spent months actually looking at the 2 exposure draft, and the committee have actually come up with many comments, and thank you for being so tirelessly compiling all the data and the comments to send it over to ISSB. So now the next speaker is is no stranger to us, and every listed company would know him as the guru of CG, corporate governance and transparency. And I'm sure throughout his career, everybody will just come, hey, Prof, please help me lah. I'm doing very hard already, working very hard already. How come I cannot, score well in our transparency index, or I cannot come up with a good sustainability report? To me, it's very good already. Can you tell me what is a good report? So, Prof, maybe we can, share your wisdom to tell us how companies can really come up with a report that is considered as addressing the key issues by investors and by stakeholders. Over to you, please, Prof. Loh.
Thank you, Esther. Let me begin by sharing is caring. Okay, someone, I need to share this. Let me see.
Share your screen, yes. Wait. Yeah, we can see that. Okay, perfect.
Okay, good afternoon, members and leaders of CDL and Hong Leong Group. I'm very happy today. Actually, when I signed up for this, or actually didn't sign up, I was actually volunteered by Esther to come yet again. I'm so happy to be back here. And before this event, Esther actually asked me to share some tips for practices for reporting. And just now we heard Michael, the regulator, settings a syllabus. Actually, what is good reporting? What is good practice? I don't know where else to go except to look at CDL, because CDL already has the model answer. In fact, even a 10-year series. And I'm very happy to share. And later on in my presentation, I perhaps from an external perspective, highlight some of the good practices from no other than even homegrown CDL and Hong Leong Group. And my approach today is perhaps to complement, to supplement all the other speakers and look from a very specific and different vantage point, which is climate action, climate reporting, climate policy, climate strategies in the overall context of the broader mandates, which is governance and strategy. So let me just give some background to a very recent study that was just released in July. This was a study done by my research center, Center for Governance and Sustainability, together with GRI. And I think Esther and also Michael mentioned about GRI, which is the existing, I would say, dominant standard now. That's a very widely used. It's a very good standard. So GRI actually partner with us. We are quite happy that they even were willing to co-brand this study. We did ASEAN study on climate action policy, particularly on the reporting relating to many aspects, including governance and strategy. So we look at the 100 largest companies across 6 ASEAN countries. You can see this from the screen. Eventually, what we found was out of 600 companies, only 420 companies as of now, among the largest in each market, have some form of climate reporting. And our framework, it kind of look like a tangram, you know. I'm sure some of you may play this puzzle game invented by the Chinese, 7 polygons. But so we also have 7 pieces, not quite polygons, but since this is sponsored also by GRI, one of the centerpieces is using the wisdom of a reporting framework together with materiality and risk opportunities. But more importantly, what we have promulgated in the conceptualization of the study was using governance as the foundation, and more importantly, the strategy, the practices, the leadership, manifestation of what is done in the organization. The strategy is the roof, or actually the visible part beyond the foundation of governance. Strategy is actually what the stakeholders will see visibly. Yes. So in terms of the 6 pieces, what we have found, 6 plus, of course, the reporting framework, what we have found is, there are many indicators that are important. And in particular, looking at strategy, we are looking at many things. For example, the synchronization of their climate reaction, the climate analysis in terms of scenarios. How is it actually integrated? How is it synced with the overall strategy plan? And there are many other indicators, but for governance, we look at how the board of directors, in particular as the principal governing organ, oversee and also manage and to steer the goals and targets of climate reporting. So just in terms of the findings, there are actually many findings, and I think in my presentation I give the link to the full report, but just to highlight a couple of set of findings relating to one, governance, and later I'll talk about strategy. In terms of governance, what we are very happy is you can see it's actually a mixed bag across 6 ASEAN jurisdictions, but what we found is that very good news. Many of the companies actually share, or even the responsibility between the board and management, that there's quite a bit of interaction, because the board can oversee, but we also need the execution, and I think this is where management can come in. So this is one part of it that's important, how governance interact very coherently, cogently, and convincingly with management. And of course, another finding in terms of the governance is, of course, the remuneration, the reward system. And actually what we found, if you look at the maybe just the rate part of the bar, the last bar on the right side is actually very low. I'm not saying we should all be paying, but the sustainability people, but actually if you look at the top management, you look at directors, many of their rewards, their performance KPIs are right now still in the very early stages of being directly linked to some of the performance of the company in sustainability, and what part they play particularly to drive the effort towards sustainability. So that's the governance part, and there are 6 other parts, but I'll just highlight one more part, which is the strategy. And what we found is that many companies like to talk about long-term strategy. Obviously, it's quite natural because probably the management and the board will no longer be around in the organization. So they like to set, net zero, 2050, 2030, with things that is beyond more than even 10 years. And what we found that is many companies are quite shy of taking, especially long-term, from long-term towards the short-term, meaning 3 years or less. So I think that this is something that many companies can, I would say, improve on. Let me now give the report card of the study. I think Professor Tas is not complete without issuing a report card. So I have to say, if you look at the screen, I have to congratulate City Developments Limited, listed company in Singapore, for achieving a top rank in among all the 100 companies in Singapore, together with Singtel. I think CDL scored 96.4 in our rating. I think CDL probably have to work harder for the 3.6 more points to get it 100. But again, I think it's something very commendable, given that you look at the top 10, these are all very established, reputable companies. So I believe I have to congratulate Mr. Sherman Quek, and also in particular Ms. Esther Ang as the CSO of the company to drive this. But let me, as someone external, see what stakeholders viewing CDL in terms of why is it good in the reporting. For example, just this is something that I cut and paste from the report. We highlighted a couple of companies in terms of good practices. So CDL, this was something written by my research team, not by me, but my research team has wrote this. And then, we highlighted 2 companies in ASEAN for exemplary emulation, and CDL, for example, scored very well in terms of the synchronization, integration of scenario planning, not only looking at the risk number 2, but looking at opportunities, how many facets of what you do in sustainability can be gelled with the core business, actually even winning customers, winning revenue for the company. And very importantly, thirdly, what we found as a very strong point in CDL, and I believe this is something across the board, the audience today, the management and the directors, the integration of climate-related consideration into your overall process, especially in your risk. So I think that these 3 things are something that might strike across the board, across management pillars in the audience today. And secondly, I would like to highlight another best practice, which I plug and play from CDL, very nice integrated sustainability report, which was just issued in this current year for the latest financial year. I believe Esther already done it, zero in on future value. Among many good things, personally as an evaluator, what I found is that the complete consideration of the entire value chain. I think that this really set the right tone for the excellence in sustainability. That is not something that's peculiar to specific units, departments, but it's something that goes from upstream to the through stream to the downstream, and every part of the complete puzzle know what each other is doing and contribute to the mosaic, to the picture, to quote Miss Michael, to the tapestry and the loom. Yes, okay. Okay, so let me just end with some tips for leadership today. In terms of practices, in terms of reporting, because this is what Esther wants me to do. So I use the analogy of a filter. This is something that I just composed a few days ago by myself. In terms of governance and strategy, I would say we need, first of all, very importantly, to really act, to have actions. Don't just talk about reporting, don't just talk about words, but match it with action. But actually, to begin with, it's tautological. If you have no actions, you have nothing to report unless you are reporting things that you have not acted upon, which is not possible. Otherwise, it's becoming misrepresentation. So action is very important. And two, I think this is something very good for the audience today. In many parts, some of you are in line departments, in business unit. Some of you are in core functions that straddle across multiple units. So advance together as a team. Three is align with business, to borrow a word that Esther has been saying, and I think all of us will be champions. So advocacy is very important. I believe this is really the spirit of this annual forum. This is a key organ for advocacy within the CDL and the Hong Leong Group community. And of course, the last one is aspire. So I have 5 things, 5 words, 4 words, 3 words, 2 words, 1 word. If you score all of these, you will get 5A. And I think Hong Leong Group and CDL will be very well poised for the book prize in sustainability. So thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me once again. Yep.
We should thank you, Prof. Yeah, I think we'll bring you back at the panel discussion to elaborate a little bit more about your 5A and the 3C and all that. And I think this one's segue very well to the next speaker, Mr. Shai Ganu, who's actually really a very experienced and expert in advising board and corporates, how we can integrate best practices, governance. Now we are not just talking about corporate governance, we're even talking about climate governance. So we are going to, pass this time to him to see how we could make, ESG integration, through the, look at it through the business and financial lens, look at it from the forward-looking, future-looking perspective, and be future fit for any challenges that come our way. Over to you now, Shai.
Thank you, Esther. And sorry, I'm just going to share screen. Excellent. Thank you, Esther. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for having me. As Esther mentioned, my name is Shai, but I'm not really shy. And I promise you that's the first time I've used that joke. No, it's not. It's my pleasure to be here with this forum. And first of all, kudos to CDL and Hong Leong Group for setting up this forum, because it's a really important platform to share some key messages, specifically about the role of the board in driving your ESG priorities. So what I wanted to share, and hopefully you can see the full screen and not a funny visual, but what I wanted to share today is when we think about ESG and sustainability, specifically what is the role of the board? So before we start or get into some of the details, I thought I'll share a little bit about some of WTW's research that we've conducted globally. So globally, WTW, we interviewed more than 400 directors in 60 odd countries. And what was interesting is to see how different regions had different focal areas on ESG. It was very apparent, and incidentally, Esther and I were both in New York for New York Climate Week. We were planning to connect, but there were just so many events that we couldn't. But it was so obvious, or rather it's very apparent, that the biggest boardroom priority in North America actually is on the social elements. Things such as Black Lives Matters, things such as the racial and gender representation have dominated discussions in North America. Interestingly, in Europe, the environment is almost completely different, and the focus area is purely on environmental goals, and more specifically on climate goals. Almost every one of our European clients have talked about incorporating environmental measures and climate measures into their management systems, including into their incentive plans. Professor Lowe shared a little bit about practices in this part of the world. We've actually conducted research about how companies are integrating ESG measures into executive compensation plans. And more than a third of European companies actually have climate goals in their long-term incentive plans, and more than 2/3 have that as part of their short-term incentive plans. So clearly it's a big focus in Europe. When it comes to Asia, and I fully appreciate we're making broad generalizations here, but in Asia Pacific, I think for the most part, the focus has been on governance. There are about a dozen jurisdictions in Asia that have revised their codes of corporate governance, new requirements about board diversity. Hong Kong, for example, coming out with new regulation that there can't be 100% male boards anymore. So clearly the focus has been a lot more on board diversity, board composition, and enhancements of governance standards. Singapore is slightly unique in that Singapore probably touches on all three aspects, the E, the S, and the G, with varying degrees, of course. And I should say both Singapore and our neighbors in Malaysia actually are leading the charge in this part of the world with a very strong focus on climate governance, a strong focus on social governance, and of course, enhancing the corporate governance standards within listed and non-listed companies. And with that backdrop, what I thought I'd share a little bit is some of the key metrics that companies need to consider. Michael mentioned this earlier, that SGX actually came up with a paper, which is starting with a common set of core ESG metrics and proposes a list of 27 core metrics for Singapore issuers. And I wanted to share a little bit about what those metrics are. These are fairly aligned with the World Economic Forum and the International Business Council's 21 core and 34 expanded common metrics for sustainable value creation. But just putting these 27 measures or 27 KPIs that are important for Singapore listed companies. You have some environmental measures, and I must say kudos to SGX for all of these KPIs being very quantitative and very measurable. So you don't have too many soft KPIs, or you don't have qualitative KPIs. And specifically on the environmental goals, you have greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas emission intensity, energy consumption, water consumption, waste generation. On the social aspects, current employees by gender, new hires and turnover by gender, turnover statistics, number of employees, a big focus on training and upskilling. So training and upskilling as an entire average training hours, but also by gender, health and safety. So specifically looking at fatalities, high consequence injuries or lost time injury frequency rates. So much stronger emphasis on social aspects, but within the social aspects on the employees part of S. And then you have governance considerations. So things such as board independence, women on board, women in the management team, or rather proportion of women in management team, anti-corruption disclosures, certifications, alignment frameworks, and last but certainly not least, assurance of the sustainability report, which is easier said than done. But again, one of the things that CDL has led the way for several years now. And so I wanted to share a little bit about what are the measures that listed companies in Singapore need to look at. But on the next slide, this is the current proposal across the strait that Bursa Malaysia's consultation paper also is going down similar route, where they're looking at a common set of measures. However, their classification of these measures is slightly different, and they're looking at these 10 buckets. So the measures are probably similar, but the buckets are anti-corruption, community society, diversity, energy management, health and safety, labor practices and standards, supply chain management, data privacy and security, water, and emissions management. So if we do one-for-one mapping of all of these KPIs, they will be fairly similar. But what was interesting is the framework in which they're characterizing some of these KPIs. And particularly on the emissions management, they have listed that scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, at least on business travel and employee commuting, which is one element of scope 3. It is very likely in the foreseeable future that listed companies, both in Singapore and Malaysia and across this part of the world, will have a common set of measures that we have to disclose, which allows then comparability, benchmarking, and also assessing about how companies are actually adhering to the commitments that they make. So with that backdrop, I wanted to spend a little bit time doing a bit of a spotlight on three measures. So we'll start on some of the E measures. And clearly, one of the biggest E measures is carbon emission reductions. And now there are 6 main greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hexafluorochloride, perfluorochloride, and sulfur hexafluoride. Having done 4 years of chemical engineering, this is all that I have to show for it, that I know what these acronyms stand for. But then each of these gases, I think this was a landmark development in carbon accounting, that each of these gases were converted into their carbon dioxide equivalents, i.e. the global, or rather the global warming equivalent, all converted into a standard unit, which is tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, TCO2e. And all the emissions that we measure are on TCO2e basis. The basis of measuring the emissions is also important, where you have 3 sort of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is direct emissions from owned or controlled resources. Scope 2, indirect emissions from generation of purchased energy. Your emissions will be lower if you purchase renewable energy as opposed to energy that is from coal-fired plants, for example. And scope 3 is all indirect supply chain or customer-related emissions. And clearly, large organizations like CDL or most of our blue chip organizations have the ability to influence scope 3 emissions by influencing the emissions of your suppliers and your vendors, even if they are SMEs. So one area that we want to highlight in this conversation was around carbon emission reduction. The next area was on board diversity as a spotlight. And this is sharing a little bit of research that WTW did with Singapore Institute of Directors. And in full disclosure, I'm on the governing council of SID as well. And we came up with this board diversity index, which looked at all listed issuers in Singapore, 700 plus primary listing. And we looked at 8 different attributes of board diversity: physical attributes of diversity and experiential attributes of diversity. And the physical attributes of diversity being gender, age, cultural ethnicity, the experiential attributes being tenure, board independence, international experience, domain expertise, and industry expertise. And for each of these metrics, sort of there was a sweet spot that looked at a strong correlation between diversity indicators and company performance. Now, I should again repeat that: correlation, not causality, because every time you show correlations, there is a risk that somebody says, oh, I have a diverse board, why is my company not performing? That's not the intent. The intent is, at least the data suggests, that there is a very strong correlation between diversity indicators and company performance. I'll just highlight one, which comes up quite often, is this one on board independence. The Anglo-Saxon conventional wisdom is 100% independent board is preferred. However, our analysis showed us that actually companies with 100% independent board did not perform as well as companies with an 80% independent board. This is a peculiarity in this part of the world, where the sweet spot seems to be that 80%. And again, it's representative of the nature of our investor holdings. We have a disproportionately large number of listed companies in Singapore that have a controlling shareholder, either the controlling shareholder being linked to a sovereign wealth fund or controlling shareholder linked to a family. And having at least one director who is non-independent seems to provide that alignment in the long-term interests of all stakeholders. So our research actually said 80% independent director was a sweet spot, but happy to share more details on any of this later on if anybody's interested. And then the last spotlight I thought we'll do is a spotlight on G, and specifically looking at the role of the board in driving climate governance. We actually have a view that G should sit on top of ESG because it starts there. The board's key focus areas in G should be around board composition and skills, nomination and appointment of directors, board upskilling, board training, ensuring you have the right composition, ensuring that you have the right structure to deal with ESG and sustainability issues. And clearly some companies, and CDL obviously being a leader here, have set up separate board level sustainability or ESG committees. But then one thing I did want to highlight, which is not very common in Singapore or in this part of the world, is a very unique governance mechanism called a say on climate vote. Now, what this is there are, and this is we're only seeing this in Europe and North America now, where a handful of companies have, on a completely voluntary basis, put up a vote or put up a resolution at their AGMs asking shareholders to vote on their climate transition action plans. And in most jurisdictions, these are not binding votes. They're not mandatory. They're advisory votes. But it is a really good way of getting a direct mandate from your shareholders that you want the company to focus on climate transition. Case in point being Unilever, they put this up last year and they received a resounding 99.2% shareholder approval for the climate transition action plan. And although no company has stated this as its objective, I actually think this is a little stroke of genius, because not only are you asking explicit approval from your shareholders about your transition plan, you're also signaling to your shareholders that during the transition, expect a lower earnings profile or expect lower dividends, because we need to invest in the transition, and that doesn't come easy. So something for us to think about. It could be a really interesting tool, and we expect first mover advantage for some companies in this part of the world, particularly when it comes to valuation premiums on issues such as, say, on climate. And then maybe Esther spoke about climate governance. So I'll take a quick second to talk about the World Economic Forum's principles of climate governance. So in 2019, the World Economic Forum came up with sort of a set of guiding principles about how to set up effective climate governance on corporate boards. And this started at the World Economic Forum level, and there is an organization called Climate Governance Initiative, CGI, that actually has taken these principles and made its role to espouse those principles within corporate boards. Now, the way the CGI is set up is there a global governing board, which I'm fortunate enough to sit on that global governing board, but we also have country chapters. And again, sort of CDL, but some of your CDL's board members are pioneers of the country chapter. So without putting her on spot, but Wong Ai actually helped set up this Climate Governance Singapore as one of the founding members here. And the intent here was these principles to educate the board on its role in driving climate governance. And the 8 principles are climate accountability, subject command, board structure, materiality assessment, strategic integration, incentivization, reporting and disclosure, and exchange or engagement with all stakeholders. And particularly on incentivization, WTW, we're fortunate enough to work with CGI, and we came up with a guidebook for climate transition, how to align executive pay and climate transition. If anybody's interested, again, happy to share those details later on. But maybe in interest of time, I'll sort of leave you with a couple of thoughts. So as you saw in my quote card, I'm a very big believer that companies who do this well, this being embedding ESG priorities as part of their business strategy, they are not doing this solely out of the goodness of their hearts. The moral imperative can only get you so far. For this to be truly long-lasting change, companies need to understand the business benefits. And we've done a lot of research about the business benefits around valuation premiums, lower cost of capital, so banks giving you preferential interest rates, customers wanting to work with you or wanting to buy your goods and services if they feel that your values are aligned with theirs, employees choosing to work with you if they feel that the sustainability mandate is aligned with their values, and it does spark innovation and creativity. And maybe as a final thought, having done this work with hundreds of companies globally, I think we've tried to distill some key messages into isms or sayings. And if you just indulge me, I think I'll leave you with these 5 thoughts. Number 1, ESG is not CSR. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir here, but quite often we get asked that, oh, we don't need to worry about ESG. We have a volunteer day and we plant trees. That's great, but CSR is not ESG. CSR is what you do with the profits that you earn. ESG should be core part of how you earn the profits to begin with, and inherent in that, ESG should be embedded in your business strategy. Second sort of counsel is think short and go long. And what I mean by that is it is important for companies to have a long-term ambition, but then break that down into annual or even sort of more granular milestones. So focus on the activities short and on the outcomes long. Number three, let perfection not be the enemy of the good. And particularly when it comes to ESG or sustainability or climate science, the discipline is evolving. Nobody has all the answers yet. People are still figuring this out. And the progressive companies have realized that even though we may not have all the answers, that shouldn't stop us from setting targets or going down this path. Let's learn, evolve, and build the body of knowledge over time. Point number four, start with the G, as we spoke about earlier, and then align the rest of the organization. And executive incentives is actually a good way of aligning the organization. And the last point, which I mentioned earlier, it's clearly this famous line from The Godfather: "It's not personal, it's strictly business." And companies who are doing this well are appreciating that this is a pure business imperative. All right, with that, I will hand over back to Esther. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. So the next one up is actually Prasad, who's actually our senior investment directors with Aberdeen Standard Investment. Prasad, you have heard all the diverse view about, ESG is not about CSR, it's not about just SEG, and then you have to look at long term. So as a ESG investment for almost more than a decade now, right? I understand. Maybe you can give us some clarity as to like, hey, how can we really score well, among asset managers and investors? And just hand this over to you to share with us how we could score better amongst the ESG investor, which is actually fast growing in terms of volume of investment funds. And my team is going to control the slide. We are calling it up now. So just wants to use this time to remind, audience that if you have any question, send it over through the Q&A box. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Prasad.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you for inviting us to share our knowledge on ESG investing from an investor's perspective. And we have sat through, views from the academic, regulator, and consultant. And I would say that we have not seen each other's slides prior to this, but they all lead to each other really well. So I think the messages are really aligned. So maybe if we move on to the next slide, I'm here to talk about the benefits of ESG. And I think this leads on very nicely from Shai's slide that talk about how there are tangible benefits with regard to ESG. And, we need to look at that from an investor's perspective, but also from a company's perspective as well. So before we talk about the benefits itself, it's important to first define what we mean by ESG from our perspective. And this is really because ESG can mean quite different things to different people. I will draw your attention to the box on the right over here, where we talk about the three key factors of E, S, and G. So just to give you an example, an E factor for a cement company could be how the considerations surrounding the company, they are dealing with climate change that can actually drive their valuation down over the long term, and actually how the company can pivot their business over the long term, especially when, Esther talked about how carbon costs are rising by 5 times over the next 2 years and forward. So that's the E part of the business. If you look at the S part of the business and we look at it from a textile company perspective, and I think overall we hear about how, North American companies do pay a lot of attention on this. So if you think about, say, a Nike supplier in Asia, they would be thinking surrounding about considerations on the usage of cotton as well as forced labor within their supply chain, and that would be the S consideration that is relevant to their business. Now the G factor, and again, this comes through very, very strongly across all key speakers, actually, that G leads the way. And in Asia, where many families are business owned, how do we strike the balance of having sufficient board independence and yet have the relevant skill sets to drive the company forward, given the challenging set environment that we have? But I think the key message here is that when you put all these factors together, they are relevant to your business, they will be material, and they will have financial implications to corporate performance as well to investors' return like ourselves. So if we move on to the next slide. Now you will think that what we have mentioned so far sound pretty qualitative. Are there really tangible benefits of ESG? And the next few slides here is to show you the evidences of some of the research that have been done on this part, that there are actually implications to the valuation as well as cost of funds. So if you look at the chart on the left-hand side, you will see that actually companies that have high scoring ESG do trade at a growing premium. And this is pretty intuitive if you think through the rationale. If you believe that better ESG management leads to higher quality, this in turn should lead to a quality premium that the companies should be trading at. And therefore, again, linking back to the point just now about quality premium that Shai has mentioned as well. Now, we talk about borrowing costs. I refer you to the table on the top right-hand corner, and you will see that basically companies with better ESG rating, they do have lower borrowing costs as well. And again, the rationale here is quite intuitive. Many banks today, they do take governance risks into the calculation of credit risk. And increasingly, many banks, starting with the developed markets, but I think Singapore banks are not far behind, they are taking climate-related risks as part of the credit risk assessment as well to the longer term and the cost of funds that they charge to their business. So there are long-term benefits in terms of lower borrowing costs to your business. The third aspect would be capital flow, which is something that we investors look at. And I will draw your attention to the bottom right-hand corner, where basically what I've shared so far is not a secret. Everyone knows about it. And I think we have regulators aligned to that as well. So you will see that ESG fund flows have really spiked. This is an old data that we have from 2020, but later on I will show you more updated data. But essentially, the fund flows are also backing the ESG benefits. So moving to the next slide, these are some of the evidences in terms of the research that have been done by external parties. So this is something that's been done by MSCI that done over a 4-year study period. And essentially what they are trying to show here is that if you look at the bar chart from left to right, companies with basically higher ESG rating will actually have lower cost of capital. And what's really interesting about this is that this differential is even larger in emerging markets. And this is where I think something that companies that are positioned in emerging markets can capitalize, as well as we from an investor's perspective can also capitalize. If we move to the next slide, this is another study done by MSCI, but this time over a longer period, which is a 10 years period. And this is for, equities that is world ex US. So really the rest of the world ex US. And here again, what you find is that I'll draw your attention to the gray line over here, which is companies with highest level of ESG rating. Over time, they tend to outperform the rest of their peers as well. So I think this speaks to the earlier point about ESG quality premium that we talked about earlier on. If you go to the next slide, and this is the last evidence that I'm showing you, another study from NYU. But essentially, what we are seeing is that there are a positive correlation between ESG and financial performance. You'll see this in two main ways. The first way would be on correlation with operational metrics. So this is like the operational metrics such as ROE, ROA, or stock price in terms of positive ESG linkage to financial performance. And the second point would be in terms of investment performance, which is the share price that we showed just now, that basically you do have a good correlation as well to the risk-adjusted returns such as alpha or Sharpe ratio when we view it from an investor's lens. So these are all really evidences to substantiate why from a quantitative perspective, we are seeing real benefits of ESG focus from the company's perspective, but also from an investor's perspective. Now, with that as a backdrop, let's take a look at what's changing currently with regard to the overall environment. And I'll summarize as to things are changing in two main ways. The first way is flow. The second way is regulation. Starting with the flow, we are really seeing strong traction from a flow perspective. What this graph show you here is basically the total ETF equity flow that you see, the top gray line there, growing exponentially in up to June 2021, and this is totaling to $198 billion in terms of total ESG ETF equity flow. But I think what's even more interesting from our part of the world is that we don't think this is just a developed market phenomenon. This is also happening in emerging markets. But I think we are slightly behind in terms of this flow, and that's where opportunity comes in from the company's perspective, but also from an investor's perspective. So you see the dark black line over here that, emerging market ETF, in terms of ESG ETF, has grown quite significantly to $39 billion US, and this is happening only over in the last few years. This slide makes a very similar point, but this is very specific to what we call impact investing. And this is really about having aligned investment to UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is Esther's background over here in her slides. But essentially, what we are seeing here is that, when you look at the change over the last 5 years, we are actually seeing a 20 times increase in terms of allocation to impact investing. And where we are today, we are probably in that very much early phase. And because regulation is part of this drive, and we are just at the start of the journey. Moving on to the next slide, this talk about the second change that we are seeing, which is regulation. So the most advanced regulation today that we are seeing being adopted is actually happening in the EU. And we do think that this is already starting to have global impact. We have something called an SFDR framework, which I won't bore you with the details over here, but essentially what this means is that the EU will classify the different funds according to Article 6, Article 8, and Article 9. And what that actually means is that each article would have a varying degree of ESG intent for that fund perspective. And ultimately, what this means is that this will determine what type of investors can invest in what funds and what type of stocks can go into which fund as well. And that, again, will have implication on flows. So overall, what we are seeing from this change is that we are seeing strong traction in flows. Regulation side, EU is the start, but they won't be the only one. We think it's a global trend, and Singapore is also working very closely on the taxonomy front as well, and we are seeing this coming through very strongly. So that will actually drive the flow factor even higher, and create some challenges, but more importantly, opportunities for companies that are well positioned for this, like city development as well. So this leads to the point about our observation of how our companies are responding. If you move on to the next slide, and you will see that generally there is a wide spectrum in terms of companies' response across the region. From our observation, we'll see that Singapore and North Asian companies, such as in North Asian companies like Taiwan, for example, are also doing this pretty well. And they generally go through 4 main phases. The first phase is identify. This is really about identifying your ESG risks and opportunities. Second phase is about measurement. And I think, the new framework, the standards, the matrix that all our expert speakers talk about just now really helps to beef up this measure part, and having a standardized way for investors to actually assess the quality of reporting. The third bit is embed. And this is coming across again in other speakers' presentation, but it's really about embedding your ESG strategy as part of your overall business strategy. It should not be separate, it should be integrated, which is something that city development has done well, as Professor Low has mentioned as well. And the last bit is communicate. And again, after you've gone through that phase, ultimately you will need to communicate this to your stakeholders, whether you talk about the regulators, you talk about investors, as well to the board of directors, so that we all can be on the same page and help to challenge each other in this really fast changing world. So the key is that there are clear benefits to ESG investing from both investors and customers' perspective. We have talked about the evidences just now, whether you think about the valuation premium, we think about the cost of capital. What's really changing is that we are seeing strong traction in terms of capital allocation, as well as tighter regulation that will drive that further. The third area is that as a company, we are seeing progressive companies positioning ESG as a differentiator. What this means is that you don't see ESG as a risk mitigation strategy. You see ESG as an alpha generation strategy, which is what investors are looking for. And the last bit is really, the overall strategies that companies should think about when we move through this ESG journey, which is about identify, measure, embed, and communicate. And you will see that this is going to be a multi-year process as we get more data, as standards get more defined, as investors also know what to ask for as well over the long term. So end my presentation here, and back to Esther, please.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, well, I think, don't talk about, the audience, even we have been doing this for a long time. And there are a few key messages are very clear that, yes, ESG is like really ubiquitous. Everywhere we go, there is a ESG, a topic. And it looks like it is here to stay. It's not going to be a fad, it come and go, right? And I think now the issue is, a lot of companies seems to be convinced that, yes, we should have a ESG mindset. Now, the biggest challenge is actually skill set and the so-called enabler. So in your opinion, in a different field, what can be really, effective driver that can, scale up and also accelerate? I mean, we have all the so-called actions and, really there is advantage, but we all know that it is so broad, just to understand, just now Shai talked about the scope 1, 2, and 3. I have many, many companies and, executives ask us, what exactly is scope 3? So then, we also have a lot of people ask like, how do we, really, what is carbon accounting, And so there's so many things are all intertwined. It's like better reporting will help you to communicate better with investors. So what exactly is a better, reporting? So I think ESG now, and actually over the last week, I actually came across the EGS. So I thought it's a typo. Actually, it is not. It's actually World Trade Organization is promoting environmental goods and services, as a new advantage. So when we talk about goods and services, they look at the environmental aspect as well. So I think we are facing in this world of like really sustainability needs. If I could ask, everyone, every speaker, just to tell us that one clear thought. How can we really, move the needle in our own organization to really embrace and integrate ESG? Who should be doing it? The board, top management, C-suite, operations, or who should be doing it? Yeah. Who want to go first?
So Esther, if I may just quickly, every time I get asked this question about who should be doing it, A, B, C, D, or E, my answer is always yes. In that everybody should be doing it, right? It can't be the responsibility of just one group or the other. There are, of course, different levels of responsibility and how different stakeholders can play a role here. I mean, I'm wearing the board hat here, so let me just start there. I think it fundamentally starts with the board having clarity of thought, but also commitment that this is the right thing to do for the business. Not because this is a moral responsibility or not because of check the box compliance perspective, but because the board strongly feels that aligning ESG with your business strategy is the right way of conducting business. So clearly there is an element there. And we can chat more about that later on, but there are several examples where companies have pivoted their business strategies towards more sustainability lens. So for example, Starbucks, focusing a lot on the S part of ESG in the development, the upskilling of their baristas, and the E part of ESG in the sustainable sourcing of their coffee beans and other sort of ingredients. And that's been a big part of their value proposition to their customers as well, that when you're buying products from Starbucks, you're sort of aligning your interests with those of the broader planet and community. You have other examples like Patagonia, which recently has been in news for giving away the entire business to the planet, which I know it's slightly different because it's a certified B corporation, but let's park that for the time being. But clearly there is a lens that or rather a role that the board has to play in driving this. But I will also say there is equally, if not more important role that management has to play in this equation. And specifically what I mean by that, it doesn't matter, if you don't have a management team that is genuinely committed, the board can talk about this till they're red in their face, but you need a management team and you need a CEO who's truly committed at driving this. One of the examples that gets spoken about a lot, and this is, I'm not sharing anything confidential because this has been spoken about in public forums, the oil and gas major in Italy, ENI, ENI again had a board that was constituted a combination of investor representatives, a combination of government representatives, and the board started talking to management about driving their decarbonization journey. But it was not until the current CEO joined them, truly took this as a core part of his mandate, aligned the entire organization, and really started driving sort of a change agenda and moving them from brown to green. Only then they've started seeing some traction in their renewable energy investments and others. So I would say the two main players here, the board and the CEO.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yes, Prof, I was about to ask you already. Yes, what's your thoughts?
Okay, I think just to add to what Esther you have said and also what Shai has said, I think I want to take a little bit of different tack. Of course, the drivers are important. There's no doubt about that. The CEO, the board chairman, the board, the top management team. But actually, in my mind, equally important, if not even more important, is beyond the driver, is actually the engine of the organization. Not so much the physical engine of a car, ICE or EV, but actually the engine that comprises the processes, the policies, the culture, or even the DNA. I think a lot of companies, you have good leaders, they articulate, they advocate sustainability. There's no doubt about it. I think I go to many directors' conferences, management meeting. I reached a stage where actually a lot of leaders are actually almost like converted now. But actually, and then they set the tone from the top. But the problem is the organization is, despite the tone from the top, the organization is tone deaf. I mean, so I think the next priority is beyond just looking at the drivers. We should slowly move to build and embed, internalize mainstream sustainability throughout the organization. I believe this is probably the objective of this forum. So back to you, Esther.
Yeah, Michael, is there anything regulator can do to inject more DNA in listed companies?
Yeah, I totally agree with Prof. I think the end outcome we want is that business considers sustainability as part of business consideration, right? It's mainstreaming sustainability into business. And that is why when we looked at the initiatives that SGX has rolled out, it really targets all different levels. We require, firstly, from the top, more directors to attend a one-time sustainability training. For the SGX listed directors this year, I hope you've completed your training in time for reporting by your next FY's annual report. Secondly, we look at management's responsibility. I highlighted in my presentation that we want a discussion about what is management's role in sustainability reporting. And lastly, we rolled out workshops for preparers of reports specifically for climate reporting, and that was on a subsidized basis for all of our listed companies. So I think it's really working through all levels so that in the future, each business or operations teams within the company would think about sustainability as part of what they need to do. I think if I draw an analogy to say anti-corruption, for example, it's something so obvious that in whatever we do, we think that surely we can't breach these requirements, right? It's not for a compliance department to start trying to raise awareness about anti-corruption. So I think we want to reach a stage where it is mainstream.
Yeah, okay. Before I pass the mic to Praxa, actually, I want to embrace one question from one of our director. She asked, Ms. Carafong asked about recently there are reports that benefits are not so obvious for investors that invest in ESG focused company. So, what are your view on that? And so expand on this, these questions that the three speakers have shared, and plus Ms. Carafong's question. Thank you. Over to you, Prasa.
Okay, let me expand on what the speakers have shared first, just so that we have a synchronized answer. But essentially, I think we got to look at the whole. In terms of the drivers, everyone have to move together, and therefore everyone would have to play the role in their part. So you start from the board, which is the governance level, then you really talk about the oversight that the board have with regard to, establishing ESG strategy, which is part of the overall corporate strategy. So that's number one. The board needs to be trained up so that they will have sufficient knowledge or even better knowledge than management, so that they can be our eyes and ears on the board from investors' perspective to challenge management and to ask the right questions. So that's the board's level. If you come down to the management level, then it's really about implementing and executing the strategy that has been set out from an ESG perspective. That this is where the linkage to have measurable milestones for the board to track, for management to track, for investors to track comes in, and linking that milestones to KPI and to ultimately compensation. So there's accountability involved, and we can see that this helps to mitigate the risk of greenwashing as well. Then it comes down to the next level, where essentially, one company in the industry alone doing the good thing is not enough. And that's why we have to take the value chain along. And that's the role of leaders within the industry like CDL, where you would be the key role because you are the leader in this space to drive the rest of the industry along, because it will really make a difference. And also because if you think about the tangible benefits, again, it affects your carbon tree scope emission as well from that perspective. So it's really about everyone playing their role, and again, regulators driving that in the right direction. But I think currently regulators themselves are also finding their own footing as to how to regulate to have the right outcome. And addressing Carol's question, thank you for your question. I think we got to look at the time frame as to how the direct impact of ESG versus, say, the benefits that are coming through, because I think a lot of things that we talk about in the ESG space are investment that you have to make in the short term to medium term, but the benefits, you might actually see this in the medium to long term. And therefore, as a result, it may not be that apparent today, but they can be a tail risk to your business, especially if regulations are tightening up really fast. So if you talk about examples within, say, the supply chain that we see currently and is happening, last year, and a supplier of Apple, which has been very strict with regard to this usage of forced labor. Apple represents 60 to 70% of their business, and because they failed to comply and there were an element of forced labor found in their supply chain, basically that business was suspended. So that actually has a short-term implication, and if you look at the share price, it has a real impact. So some of these are tail risks that will only surface should things go wrong. The second thing is when we talk about ESG quality premium, a lot of that would also driven by the style of the market today. Year to date, if you look at the style rotation of the market that we have been in a very painful period where quality within Asia as a style underperforms. And if you link ESG to quality, I think that also explains the short-term performance. And the third bit will be in terms of regulation. And this is really because, back to my point just now about how regulators are finding their foot. But sometimes we are actually seeing regulation adopting what you call an exclusion policy. And what that means is that you are preventing, say, a sustainable fund of, we talk about Article 8, Article 9, from investing in fossil fuel companies. But actually, these fossil fuel companies need capital to do your transition. Your capitals are being allocated away, and therefore you don't have the capital to do that. And as a result, your stocks get sold down. And that if you happen to be in that bucket, you don't get recognition and capital for your transition, your stock price performance get hit. On the other hand, if you are at the other side of the spectrum, the green spectrum, then you get a lot of capital and you have a medium to long-term risk of valuation bubble creating that as well. So I think it's, like you say, it's all very, very interconnected.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, can I also say something about what get measured, get managed, and it's not just about the DNA, about the mindset. You may be very passionate, but if you don't know how to do it, or you don't know where are your weak points, that how do you do it? So let's go back to reporting, which is so important. I mean, sustainability reporting, ESG disclosure are seen as actually also very effective tools to channel funds to where the right place, and gain access to the ESG funds as well as sustainable finance, which are really key enabler today to accelerate action, especially in our green building side. And CDL actually rolled out the first green bond in 2017, and we continue to use sustainability linked loans to accelerate green building and climate action and all. So I think let's go back to the so-called sustainability reporting, how to do better and make it really effective to channel capital to where we want it to be. And I think Shai, you raise your hand. Do you want to take this question first, and also something else that you raise your hand for? Yeah.
Thank you, Esther. I thought I'll just add into what the excellent answer that Priska had around sort of the role of this anti-ESG sentiment. And Carol, is a great question, because particularly since in the last 12 months or so, we're seeing a very strong anti-ESG sentiment. I mean, not getting into the political part of this discussion, but the governor of Florida saying that the state pension fund should not be allowed to invest in any ESG asset is an extreme form of that anti-ESG sentiment. And recently, I mean, there was this ETF that was in the news. It was set up, I think it's the Strive US Energy ETF that was set up as an anti-ESG ETF. Coincidentally, their ticker is DRILL, DRLL, clearly signifying that they are all in onto fossil fuel. But after this ETF was launched, it saw a bit of an uptick for the first month or so. But then now, I mean, latest price, I think I checked over the weekend, it was down again. So even this anti-ESG sentiment, it is a little bit of a flavor of the month. And over a long term, what will and should prevail is fundamentals. And what should prevail is sort of flow of capital towards assets that are more sustainable, that have longevity, that are safeguarding all stakeholders' interests in the long term. But I also see this as a sign that ESG is maturing, because finally now you're hearing the other side of the debate as well. Because there are some people who are saying, well, it may not be all that great, and it's a more measured discussion now.
Yeah, maybe I'll also add to that discussion as well, and that's something that I guess we've been also watching. What are the what are the strengths of like anti-ESG sentiments, and whether there's any validity to some of these arguments, right? I think part of the argument is in, say, in comparability of data, inability to use data, inadequate data, and that's something that we're solving with reporting, with having better data and having standardized reporting frameworks for companies. Hopefully that would generate the consistency in the use of data. But there is a second part to it, which is the use of data. Do we all agree on how to use the data? What are the metrics that we consider to be relevant for investment decisions? And different houses will take different views on that. So if there's a divergence of view between houses, between rating agencies, I think that is to be expected. It comes with any other equity analysis that we do. Different houses will have different views as well important. So I think that we would probably progress in terms of getting more consensus, but I think there will still be a difference in that respect. And maybe then going to what Esther mentioned about, I guess, reporting and how it becomes then a basis for investors to use information. So that is what we are focused on. That is why we've asked companies to start reporting against a common set of metrics, but that would also develop with the ISSB. They would propose more than just a climate matrix. And I think as we progress, we'll probably have more consistency there. The other maybe aspect from the investors' angle I would maybe add is that from the regulators, we are seeing greater focus on how they are asking investors to better risk manage their environmental exposures. So MES has asked financial institutions in Singapore to start reporting and managing their environmental risks better. In other jurisdictions in EU, I think Prasa has shared how that has also become a regulatory focus. So in a sense, maybe regardless of the perceived benefits, we do see from the risk management perspective, reasons for why investors ought to watch ESG.
Great. Prof, you want to share how sustainability reporting can really help companies to attract funds, to accelerate their actions, and also, climate ambition?
Yes, let me just add in. I know time is up, but in short, I think if you look at how company has somewhat responded to the ongoing ESG revolution over the last few years, you can see basically the way I see it is they comes in three phases. The first phase is companies just do it more because of compliance, compliance to regulation or somewhat compliance to standards that are mandated or or required by regulators. So the mindset is very much compliance, and I think a lot of investors are stuck with this compliance. If they do well, of course there's issue of transition risk and all that. But I think eventually, when companies see that it is in their interest, which is the second phase, more than just compliance, we are looking at alignment with standards, alignment with framework, or even alignment with best practices that are intrinsically good for the company. And I think the intelligent investor has to come onto this phase now to not just check the boxes against what you have complied, but actually how does the business valuation, how does the business function align with all the practices. But I think that I think we are now probably at the cusp of a new phase. And I don't know how to think about it, but the way I see is this, that the normalcy phase. In other words, ESG becomes so much part of the organization that we don't even need to talk about it. It becomes part and parcel of what we do every day. It becomes habitual, it becomes inherent in the company, that it becomes the normal way of doing that. So I think the next phase of investor is to look at how ESG has become so much part of the organization that it becomes 1 in 2, 2 in 1. It is, some years back we have this quality movement, remember? TQM, total quality management, and over the years nobody talk about quality revolution anymore, because actually it becomes so much part of the way we do things that imperative of quality that it becomes pointless to talk about. It's moot point. So I'm hoping that the next phase, compliance, alignment, normalcy, can, we can. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. And now we only have about 6 or 7 minutes, and I really want to close with one question just to challenge your creativity, or your expertise of like, if there's only one advice you want the board, or management to do to really raise the bar and make use of ESG integrations to really take advantage of the transition to raise to zero, to expand on growth opportunities and turn risk into advantage, what will that one action be? And we also want to close the question about reporting, and will external assurance be one of such actions that will help to give investor bigger confidence in what you report on ESG performance? Yes, Praxel, do you want to go first? Lady first.
Okay, thank you. I have the honor of being the ladies first. So I think I'll wrap them all up in one advice, which is credibility. The part about third-party assurance adds to the credibility, but we think what's more important is actually about how, whether you talk about ESG plan or climate change plan all the way to 2050, how do investors actually measure that it is a credible plan, right? And with that, like what Professor Loh has mentioned in his survey, his finding number 1, which I really like, is that our complaint is that most companies say they have a plan to 2050 and this is their target. They never really tell us how to get there, and they never tell us that this is the milestone to look for in 2025, 2030. So if companies can break that up into measurable milestones, have a clear plan on how to get there, and then you communicate that, and then after that you get the certification that you need from a third-party assurance, that will help with the credibility part, which again mitigate the risk of greenwashing, which is a tail risk in this business. Maybe a tail risk for CDL, but not as a tail risk for the rest of the industry, I think.
Thank you so much, Prasa. Shai, do you agree with this?
Hard not to agree with such wise words. Of course, yes. I will maybe just add a couple of thoughts, and again in the spirit of closing. So first of all, Esther, again, thank you for having us and for this forum, because it's a really important dialogue, and it's really important that directors share some of these thoughts with each other. I guess the assurance part, definitely that provides credibility, but also provides consistency in terms of definitions, in terms of metrics, comparability across industry, across companies within the same industry, but also across industries. But I will also say this, particularly when it comes to the aligning longer term aspirations and then annual goals, is this earlier sentiment that I mentioned is let perfection not be the enemy of the good, because it does require a strong commitment from boards and management team and companies to say these are our ambitions. We've had several examples, and actually even listed companies in Singapore, where the CEO during the AGM has said that we've set these goals, but based on today's technologies, it's impossible that we achieve these goals. But that doesn't stop us from setting the goals. That is the aspiration we've set. We are hoping that because we've set this aspiration, not just us, but the entire community actually gets behind this. New technologies are developed, new standards have come in place, and then we can achieve sort of these very stretch goals. But what it also implies is a strong degree of trust between board and management, that management is not going to sandbag or lowball sort of targets, and board will recognize both the efforts and the outcomes. So clearly on the assurance part, I think I fully agree with my fellow panelists. And then Esther, to take your counsel about key message, maybe I'll sort of leave with two key messages. Number one, and I see this with a little bit of personal bias. I've served on, I've served under 5, in my board roles, I've served under 5 male chairs and 5 female chairs. And I will say that having female chairs of either your committee or female chairs of your board does give very different orientation to problem solving, and does give very different orientation to sustainability issues. So one practical thing is have more female chairs and have more female committee chairs within your board composition, because it does make a difference. And then finally, in the inimitable words of Elvis Presley, I think it's time for a little less conversation and a little more action.
Yeah, great. Okay, Michael, regulator, are you going to raise the bar from 30 by 30s to even higher, level? Yeah.
Actually, I guess my my idea is very boring, which is just better data from better reporting, and that entails several things. Firstly, using of a common digital format. I think inevitably it will entail more work for the teams on the ground, because you need to now report according to a common digital format. But I think that's important, because that's the only way to make it usable and for investors to then focus on that. I think the other is on assurance, as you mentioned, reliability of the information. We've placed responsibilities on boards, management, now on the internal audit function as well. Ultimately, I think the end goal is to reach a stage where it's comparable to financial data, where there's external assurance. There's some ways away, but I think maybe not so far away.
Yes. Hi, Prof. What's your thought, the final thought?
Okay, Esther, I know you always leave it to me for the punchline, and I think since the sun is setting, I go straight to the message. And I think just now I spoke about the 3 phases of sustainability and the reporting. CAN, compliance, alignment, and normalcy can. So I know in this audience, we have a very illustrious family of companies under the Hong Leong, in particular CDL, City Developments Limited. So my key message is, I think CDL, and just want to, motivate all of encourage. CDL means can do lah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. And really, you've given set a standard very high. And now I think it will be really most timely for us to pass this session to our group CEOs. And yeah, he has always been our biggest supporter. And moving forward, how we can even do better. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Sherman. You are on mute, Sherman. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So distinguished speakers, directors, and colleagues, thanks for joining us today for yet another annual sustainability forum, which happens to be our 9th one. Sorry, I'm down with flu today, so my voice may sound a bit sexier than usual. But thank you, Prof, by the way, for the Candula. That was certainly a very nice way to end the panel discussion, and one that we will remember. So, of course, first off, I want to thank Esther for her opening presentation. I think she covered the current status of where we're in and what's happening around the world. And of course, I also want to convey my deep appreciation to our expert speakers, Michael, Prof. Loh, Shai, and Proksa. I think all of you have generously shared your insight and wisdom to help us navigate the sustainability landscape. I mean, maybe just a touch on each speaker. Michael shared on updated reporting, disclosure and listing requirements, including director tenures, global efforts by ISSB, and of course, the very commendable establishment of the Sustainability Reporting Advisory Committee by ACRA and SGX. I hope I'm quoting right, but he talked about how governance was the thread. I think he said golden thread that weaves together sustainability. If I'm wrong, sorry, Michael. Not well. And of course, I think during the panel, Michael also mentioned something that I truly agree with, which is the importance and the urgent need for better data and standardized reporting. Right now, reporting is all over the place. Every standard has a different set of reporting standards. So, it's great if I think this can be standardized over time. So, I think data is more easily comparable. You can compare it across different companies and it makes better sense for investors and shareholders too. Of course, Prof. Loh was always, was very entertaining as always, and very endearing. He's able to dissect a very complicated subject matter into easy to understand layman terms. Particularly grateful for his kind compliments towards our group. And it is reassuring that CDL has fared well in the climate reporting. Like Michael, of course, Prof. Loh also emphasized the importance of governance and Candula. And I think what I particularly agree with also is, his final statements at the end of the panel session, where he talked about how companies need to gradually, I think, mature from just looking at ESG as compliance or checking the boxes to actually understand why it's beneficial for the company and its business. I think when that happens, that's when more apparent and better action and bigger impact will really occur. On to Shai. Shai, who is definitely not shy, touched on a variety of topics. He talked about carbon emissions reductions, and certainly it was great that he broke down the definitions for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. I know that still trips up quite a lot of people at times. He also talked about board diversity. Interesting to hear him mention that companies with 100% IDs on the board didn't fare as well as companies with 80% IDs on the board, at least for this region, sounds like. So interesting, I didn't know that. Also very commendable to hear that he worked closely with CDL ID, Ms. Wong Ai, and other business leaders to launch Climate Governance Singapore. So great that that's in motion and already established. And of course, I I particularly liked what he said also towards the end of the panel, right, where he said that you have to set lofty goals, even if it's not entirely apparent that you can get there, right? I have to share also at CDL. Although myself, together with the team and the board, we have committed, to our net zero ambitions, with the first target, being by 2030, where we're trying to get to net zero for assets under our direct control. It's a very lofty target. We only have, 7 over years left, so, 8 years left or so. It's scary. I don't know whether we can get there, but look, you want to set the lofty targets to push yourselves, and also because it inspires the rest of the industry. So I think this is where Shai was getting at. So and if it is, then I fully agree with you, because I do feel the fear as well of not being able to get there. But look, we have to challenge ourselves, right, by setting the targets high. So certainly, no sandbagging here. And lastly, of course, to thank Pruksa as well. Pruksa from Aberdeen. She highlighted the benefits to a company of having a very strong ESG integration, benefits from financial outperformance to lower borrowing costs, and how it's increasingly important to investors and shareholders. Despite the discussion you all had on this anti-ESG sentiment, and obviously they have its critics, but I do believe that big money managers and funds will certainly become even more discerning when deciding what companies to invest in and how to allocate capital. So I guess ESG priorities really have become mainstream for finance, business management, investment over the last couple of years. More than 90% of SGX 500 companies now publish ESG reports in some form. And of course, leading stock exchanges like our very own SGX have made ESG reporting mandatory. So I think everyone really needs to get up the curve. Last year, I talked about the devastating impact of climate change, and I showed some studies, predictive studies. I highlighted things like how several major cities around the world could be partially submerged underwater in future, and also the horrific coral bleaching that's been taking place. This year, we have again witnessed many major catastrophes. I think you saw the slide from Esther's presentation, right? The burning planet, I feel like it's almost every other week that we see news about devastating earthquakes, heat waves, record-breaking temperatures, wildfires. As the slide showed, right, floods in Pakistan that wiped out 90% of the country's crops. And of course, there was a severe drought in China also. So I think, central to averting climate disaster, the need for immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors. And global greenhouse gas emissions must peak by 2025, so really only in 3 years' time, and reduce by 43% by 2030. So as you can see, moving a low-carbon economy will require enormous effort by governments, businesses, individuals. So we must all work together. So, the message to the business community is clear, right? Robust ESG integration and prompt disclosure is critical, I think, to accelerate action to decarbonize business operations and address the rising expectations of regulators, investors, and consumers. So I would say the business case for sustainability integration and reporting has never been stronger. And as you've all heard over the last 2 hours, there's ample opportunity to turn these ESG risks into business advantages too. Okay, I think my voice is about to give up on me, so I really better close the session now. So, I really want to thank all of you, everyone, for attending the forum today. We hope you find it useful, and regardless of where your company is on its sustainability journey, we must continue to push on, and there is much to do, right? After all, with an unhealthy planet, it is not possible for businesses and humans to thrive. Sustainability must therefore remain a key focus to achieve a strong and balanced triple bottom line. So, on this note, I again want to convey my sincere appreciation to our 4 guest speakers today, and of course to Esther, and to the organizers who, were behind this forum. So primarily CDL Sustainability and Corporate Secretarial teams. Well done, on yet another very successful forum. So, thank you everyone. And Esther, shall I turn it back to you?
Yes, thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you for even delivering this with your voice. Yeah, but get well soon. Yeah, so I'm really thankful to all the speakers and everyone. Spend 2 hours of the valuable time to join us. I think I just want to close it that Milton Friedman's ideology is dead. Business is no longer just about short-term profits. I mean, as parents, we all want to really leave behind, a healthier planet for everyone, for our future generation as well. And with this, we hope to continue our conversation even before the next forum. Okay, thank you and goodbye. Thank you. Thank you all the speakers.
Thank you.